Ikaba kahiko, mamualoa o kapanakuki. Once upon a time, a long time ago, way before Captain Cook, on these islands, there was a high chief of this island, whose name was Umi. And it helps a little to, if you're not too familiar with the geography, to realize Big Island is the biggest, and it's kind of like down here, sort of kind of roundish with points. The only two we have to be concerned with for the story is right above it, in a more horizontal way, is the island of Maui. And it's composed of mainly two volcanoes that got together. One big one, Haleakala, over here, and another smaller one over here with a valley in between. What's going to be in the story is a place called Huna, which is the far eastern end and north of the whole Hana coast is the northeastern coast of this part of Maui, okay, and the big island down below. And the story goes between the northeastern part of this island, a place called Waipio, and the Hana area, it's called, of Maui. Okay, so that kind of sets the scene. Anyway, one of these days, in this valley of Waipio, Umi hears his wife, Pi'ikea, crying out with great wailing. And so he rushes home to find out what's going on. And it turns out that she has her brother who just came over from Maui, because that's where she was from originally. And he gives the news that their elder brother, who took over the chiefdom of Maui, on that part of Maui, when their father died, has turned out to be very cruel and very evil, harassing the family members, being very cruel to the people of the land. And so Pi'ikea says, this can't happen, this is terrible. We have to do something to help my people. We may need to go over there and do battle with this, my brother, whose name is Ino, and make Kiha the chief in his place. Umi says, oh, wait a minute, I can't do that. I made a promise that I would not invade Maui. And his wife says, the promise is no longer valid because you made that promise to our father, not to the evil son. There's nothing wrong with going over and getting rid of him to put a good man in his place. Well, Umi still wasn't so sure. He had as a chief, he had a personal kahuna who would advise him in different things. The kind of kahuna, there were many different kinds. This was the kind of kahuna who was able to actually do psychic work, to look into the future, to see what things might be, to get the knowledge that was underneath things and around things. So, and he also had three of his favorite companions that helped him become chief. Umi was one of the very, very few people in Hawaiian history who actually began as a commoner and became a chief through his own efforts. A rare thing, but it's honored when it happens. Anyway, he called his three companions and the kahuna. First he asked the kahuna, what do you think about this possibility of going to invade Maui? And the kahuna says, victory! I dreamed about it. So I know it's sure. Well, okay, Umi was a warrior, and he knew that nothing's sure in war, but still, that was a good omen. So then he spoke to his companions, and they were all eager. They thought this was a good idea, to get rid of the bad guy, have some fun fighting at the same time. Okay? That's how they looked at it, you know. So he says, all right then, here's the orders. Get ready for war. And so with that order, they went out, and they started all the process that was involved in war in those days. They started refurbishing and building new canoes. These are war canoes, big ones that hold a lot of men. They're sailing canoes. They started making spears. Usually, we have some trees, a lot of them around in this area were a favorite one for the shorter spears, made of lehua, or actually ohia wood, very nice hardwood. And so they made spears, short spears and long spears. Some of the long spears that they used in battle, by the way, could be 18 feet long. And then they almost like pikes. And then they had shorter ones for throwing. So then they started doing that. They used a lot of slings in those days. So that people had to go out and gather the stones, and they shaped these sling stones in a very special way. And then they had to braid the slings. So all that work went, and supplies were gathered from the countryside. Everything was prepared, so it took a while. But finally they were ready. And so Umi gave the order, all right, it's time to go. And so he got his beautiful feather helmet and his feather cloak and boarded the first boat, and off they took. Now tradition, when we hear about this or read about this as a traditional event, it says that it's quite a long distance, but coming up from Waipio, the first canoes reached Hanalei Bay while the last canoes were still leaving Waipio. That's what they said. You know, that big a fleet. So anyway, here they come into Hana Bay. And in the meanwhile, of course, the people of Maui knew what was coming, and Ino had made his preparations, but they got all the warriors and most of the people, because they didn't bother the people in the countryside. Warriors fought against warriors at that time. And so, but they all went up on this hill, Kauiki. And this is if you're looking from your point of view, and let's say this is Hanalei Bay. On this side is a big hill of lava, very, very steep, and it was used as a fort by the people of Maui when they needed to. But it's very steep all around. So Umi's forces landed, and they had decided what to do. They sent out scouts, and they said around the backside of this hill, it's not a bad slope until the base, and then it goes up real steep, and they have a ladder there. But we could see from the bottom that they also have stones piled up at the top of the ladder, and that seems to be the only way up. So they looked all around, and that was the only way to get up on top. So the first companion said, okay, well, it doesn't look like we can do this in the daytime, we'll go tonight. And so he had his group of warriors, and that night they went quietly down there. And then, while Umi and the others are waiting, and then they came running back after an hour or two, and totally afraid. And they said, there's no way we can do this. There's a giant at the top of the ladder. Never seen a man so big. And he's standing, you can see him. And we can't fight him. And they were ready to jump in the canoes and go back to Big Island. And Umi said, wait, let's think about this. Maybe we can come up with another plan tomorrow. So they waited overnight. Next day, the second companion, he went out to look at it. He said, came back and they laughed at the other group. He said, there's nobody up there. There's a ladder and the stones, that's all. We'll take them by surprise tonight. So night came, gathered his forces, went all the way up there over to where the ladder was. And they came running back. He said, never saw a man so big. He's got these big broad shoulders. He's got a club in his hand as big as a tree. He says, if we try to climb that ladder, he's going to swat all of us one by one. There's no way we can do this. So Umi was thinking, what is he going to do? And the third companion came up. The third companion, his name was Pi'imai. And he said, okay, let me scout with my men. Let me see what can be done. So it was daytime, and he went with his men, and there was the ladder, and there were the stones. And he said, well, let's see what will happen if we try to go up. So he said, I'll go alone. No sense anybody being killed here. And see what happens. So we went to the base of the ladder, and when he just got to the base of the ladder, this whole shower of stones came down. Now, Pi'imai was a very good warrior. They all were, but he had a specialty. He had a kind of a club that had a cord attached to it. And it was the kind of club that you would swing with while it was tied to a cord. And he was very good at that. And so he used the same technique that he would use on a battlefield to knock aside spears that other warriors were throwing at him. And he did that to knock the stones away while he backed off. And he said, well, there is no way we can take it in the daytime. Okay? Because I just barely made it. So we're going to go and look again at night. So like the others, they came back and they got to the base of the slope where they could see up above. Sure enough, there's that giant standing there. So Pi'imai says, well, I'm going to go and the rest of you stay here. Maybe I can challenge him. Now see, there was this society of old ancient Hawaii was very much a feudal type society, not a tribal. They had the equivalent of kings and dukes and barons and counts and all that kind of stuff in a hierarchy of aristocracy. And on the battlefield, it would be very common for two champions to challenge each other, and if they did that, they would fight, and the others would all wait, because that could mean the outcome of the whole battle. So they had that kind of thing. So he's going to go and see if he can challenge this giant. So he goes up there, and the way to challenge, sometimes they would shout things, but he didn't want to shout. He didn't want to make a lot of noise, but another way to challenge was to simply swing your club. So he twirls his club around, the giant is right up there. He doesn't respond. And Pi'imai is thinking, well, either he doesn't know the tradition or maybe he didn't see me. So he, he's a brave man, but still, this is a very scary thing to do. He climbs up about halfway, looks up, twirls his club, no response. That guy's awful still, I'm going to go to the top. Maybe he's just waiting for me to get there. So he climbs all the way up to the top. There's this big giant right there. And the only thing Pi'imai can think of to do at that point, he says, I'm going to dash in real fast, smack him, and avoid his blow. So he does that. He runs in, whack! He hits the giant with his club, and then realizes it didn't sound like flesh. It sounded like wood. He looked around past the giant, and everyone else, all the warriors of Maui, are sleeping deeply. And so he goes up, nobody heard that. So he goes up and he feels it, and he's wonderfully carved. He's even got a malo, which is like a breech clout. And he's got his club, but it's all wood. And it has a hollow kind of a sound, so it's not solid. So Pi'imai is a very strong warrior. He grabs his wooden statue, takes it to the edge, and throws it down the cliff. And it crashes and breaks apart right in front of his own men. Then they realize that the whole thing was a trick. So Pi'imai starts to defend the top of the ladder, and his men come swarming up. And in a very short period of time, they conquered all the people of Maui. And Ino, who tried to escape, was killed. He was the evil chief. Kiha was made chief. And now Kiha was now chief of all of Maui. And so in gratitude for Umi's work, why he gives the whole area of Huna to Big Island. And so in those days, and for many generations, that part of Maui belonged to Big Island. That's how it happened. Okay. So, Pipiholo Keka'au, which means, so runs the story. Now, from this story, some of the things that happened in this story, we can get into the topic, which is the topic for today. It's how to find your inner strength. And we saw some examples of people who lost it, and at least one example of someone who had it. So let's see what we can learn. We can learn more about these. First of all, we have a principle in our knowledge. When I was taught this knowledge that we call Huna, Huna means esoteric knowledge. And I was taught a particular type by my Hawaiian family that adopted me. And my uncle taught me this knowledge in terms of 7 ideas about life. And so I'm going to use those ideas to explain this topic. The first one is that the world is what you think it is. Now, what we saw from the story is that the warriors were afraid of what they thought they were seeing. In psychology, there's this concept also. It's called the tiger in the bush. I'm not sure if you're familiar with modern psychology, but the tiger in the bush phenomenon is that if you think there's a tiger in a bush about 100 yards away, or 50, okay, you'll have the same reactions, physical, emotional, chemical. You'll have the same reactions as you would if there was no tiger in the bush, if there really was one, or if you just thought there was one. Your reactions are going to be the same. Well, this was in the story of this ancient time. And so this is what their first men had. They thought they saw a giant. It sure looked like one to them. And they reacted with fear and ran. Not only did they react with fear, they reacted with sense of helplessness and hopelessness. We often, many of us, become so afraid of our own imaginings, and we base our actions and our reactions on things that exist only in our mind. Human beings have this wonderful capacity to imagine what was and what wasn't, to imagine what is and what isn't, and to imagine what will be or won't be. It's fabulous. Most of the time, it's our best tool, especially if we learn how to use it. But it can also be our worst enemy if we forget that we're making up what we're thinking about. And anything about the future is made up. It might turn out to be more or less accurate, but in the moment it's all made up. And we can make one that scares us, and we can make one that gives us hope. And we do it both ways sometimes. Now, the second idea says there are no limits. There's lots of ways to talk about this. But here we're talking about when we say a thing cannot be done. Like the warriors in the story said that there's no way we can take that hill. We're making up a rule. And then treating that rule that we've made up like truth. Because you don't know if something can't be done until you try to do it. And they didn't try to go up the ladder. They didn't try to confront that. They just saw that, made up a rule, and ran. And we do this a lot. Rules can be changed, though. This is what also this knowledge teaches. We can change the rules, and by changing the rules, change the way we think, change the way we feel, change our behavior and what we are capable of doing. Just by changing the rules. One time I remember, and I've told this story several times, but I remember one time when I was learning how to ski, and I had, by using my imagination, I had learned how in one day to go from pre-beginner, because I had to crawl up the first slope, okay? No experience, I was in my 30s, and 30 or 40s, I can't remember, and got up there, but anyway, I watched and used my imagination to imagine I was the other skiers that I saw. So by the afternoon, and the next day especially, I was low intermediate skiing, going up the better slopes. Right? Until I decided to take a chairlift that looked very interesting, and I thought I knew where the people were coming down from that chairlift. So I got on the chairlift, got to the top of this peak, looked around, and there was nothing but these little signs with black dots, black diamonds on them. Okay? I was on the high, upper end expert peak. And no way to get down except to go down. Like, not the kind of lift you can catch to go down. And there was I went off to look at one trail, and it looked like it was a straight cliff to me. And yet there I was. Now I could have sat up there and cried until a very nice ski instructor came along and helped me down, or a helicopter picked me up or something. But that's not the way I work. Now, I know world rules can be changed, and the first rule said, I can't do that. So I changed that rule. And I've never done this before, but I went to the edge of one of the slopes, and I used some words to help me change the rule. I used two things I'll tell you about. The first thing I used was I just repeated the phrase, no fear. And if some of you think that the subconscious doesn't hear negatives, that's false. It hears everything, especially if your intention is very clear. So I just repeated no fear until my body had calmed down. And then something that I learned that not very many people think about as something that they can actually do, but it is possible to do. It's to stop thinking. I shut down my imagination, because if I didn't, it was going to take me into that bush and that tree and off that. So I just stopped thinking once I had got my body calmed down with the first phrase, and then just pushed off. I made it. Here I am today, and I never fell. I went as slow as it was possible to go, but that wasn't very slow. But I never hit a tree or anything like that, and I finally made it down. I did not go back up to try it again, but I did make it down that slope by doing some of the things we're going to be talking about in a few moments. So when we change the rules, we can change our thinking and our behavior and our outcomes. Now we have an idea that says energy flows. These ideas, by the way, are not rules. You could use them as rules if you wanted to, but they're just ideas. We use them as tools. So this one says energy flows where attention goes. Now, wherever you direct your attention, your energy flows in that direction, either physically in your own movements or by plans and things that you start to make. And it tends to attract similar kind of energy, which is why if you start on an interesting project, you attract people to help you. It's also that attention goes where energy flows, which is why people are fascinated by fires and accidents and volcanic eruptions. And anything that has a lot of energy, our attention is drawn toward that too. So both things happen. But the thing is, when we're talking about inner strength, which is going to help us move forward in some way, you're only going to move forward when there's something important enough to move forward to. Otherwise, you're not going to move, or you're going to just kind of wander around. But when something is important enough, when you put your focus on something that's important enough, then your energy almost pulls you, as long as you keep it important. So the energy of getting back to my wife and family and a nice hot toddy is what drew me down the slopes and helped me get back home in that situation that I was in. Now here, in the story, of course, they are there to overthrow an evil chief for Uri's wife and the people. Okay? So they had a very nice, good motivation there for that. So that's what kept them going, and of course that's what kept Pi'imai going. So that inner strength then, in that case, when we're talking about this concept, it arises from a desire to do or be or have something. If you have some rules about yourself that you think are so important you will not change them, you see and picture yourself in a particular way, and that particular way says that you always accomplish what you set out to do, for example, then that'll keep you focused and move forward. We have another idea that says now is the moment of power. Now, present moment. Lots and lots of things we could go into, but right now, inner strength is not something you wait for. Sit back and, boy, as soon as I get some inner strength, then I'll start moving forward. And it doesn't work like that. Or hope that somebody's going to give it to you. It doesn't work like that either. It's not something that only a special few are born with. And it's not something you have to develop like a muscle. It's something you have already. And the only thing you have to do is use it in any given moment. Because it's there. We're going to get a little more clear. You have to practice using it so that it becomes more familiar to you. We have a statement that says to love is to be happy with. That means to be happy with something or someone. It's a direct translation of the word aloha. Inner strength comes from using your own good qualities, your talents and abilities. And the more you acknowledge them, appreciate them, love them, the stronger they get. If you take them for granted, they may not be strong enough when you really need them. But if you recognize their worth and you appreciate having them and you're glad of it and you enjoy it, which is part of love, then you're going to grow every time you do that. We have a statement that says all power comes from within. That means the spiritual self within. And let's look at it this way. Self-doubt is what generates fear. But how you react to fear is a choice. Here's something that's very important to understand. We talk about courage. Courage is moving through fear, in spite of it, toward something you want to do, be, or have. It's not moving forward without fear. That's called confidence. Courage is when you have fear and move in spite of it. And that's something, a decision that's possible for anyone to do. So often we become afraid of the fear. It's not a good feeling at all. And we so much don't want to have that awful feeling that we'll back off without even trying to do something. That leads us nowhere. Fear is when you say, okay, I've got fear. I'm afraid. It feels bad. I'm going to go ahead in spite of it. That's courage. Now, and practicing courage develops confidence. So I can remember this from the very first time I began speaking in public. You know, they did a survey in the United States some years ago of what people feared most. And it wasn't death. It was standing up and speaking in front of people. Okay? And there are people who will faint. There are people who will get sick. There are people who, I used to have a teacher training course, and one woman, when it came time for her assignment to stand up and speak at the end of the week, even though she'd been training, she broke her ankle. Oh. And the funny part about that was you say, well, you know, she couldn't have that. Well, yes, she could. It was about a 6-inch step that coming into the room that she went off. And when I rushed up to help her, I didn't realize this until afterwards, and she was not doing it consciously. It was her subconscious that didn't want to get up there because she pointed to the wrong foot. And that's the one I tried to heal. We finally had to call the ambulance, but I saw her a week later, you know, with the cast on the other foot. And she wasn't even consciously aware of it, but there was a fear in her so bad. Wow. But when you practice courage, when I began speaking, I was very afraid. But I've done it a lot. And so after a while, when you practice courage, that's what develops confidence. Now, confidence is moving forward in spite of self-doubt. Okay? The self-doubt can come up, but you make it disappear by ignoring it or making it, not suppressing it, by making it not important. Oh yeah, there's that old doubt again. put it aside, and move forward with confidence. Because you're doing something you know about truth. The last idea of this series is one that says effectiveness is the measure of truth. Now there's lots and lots of ways to reveal, to recognize, to apply inner strength. And there's 4 tools to make it work. And all human beings have these tools for doing things. That's all we have. We can use words, imagination, feelings, that you can also call energy if you want to, and movement, physical movement of some kind. That's what we do to do anything, some combination or one at a time. If you practice using words then that affirm your inner strength, if you practice imagining yourself having it and using it, if you practice feeling it as a secure center of your being, and you practice standing and moving as if you already had it, then you're going to get more comfortable with it. These kinds of things work. It's still a very hard thing to define. So in order to help that, I'm going to use some lyrics from a song that's called Do It Anyway. And the woman who wrote the song is Martina McBride. And it actually, I remember, I was looking for it, but I couldn't find it, but many, many years ago, there was, I don't remember the author, or the author was anonymous, who gave a whole list of things. But McBride incorporated that. It was called Do It Anyway. And she incorporated that and simplified it in her song. So I'm just going to give you the lyrics. You can spend your whole life building something from nothing. One storm can come and blow it all away. Build it anyway. You can chase a dream that seems so out of reach, and you know it might not ever come your way. Dream it anyway. God is great, but sometimes life ain't so good. When I pray, it doesn't always turn out like I think it should. But I do it anyway. I do it anyway. The world's gone crazy, and it's hard to believe that tomorrow will be better than today. Believe it anyway. You can love someone with all your heart for the right reasons, and in a moment they can choose to walk away. Love them anyway. You can pray, you can pour your soul out, singing a song you believe in, that tomorrow they'll forget you ever sang it. Sing it anyway. That's inner strength. And I hope it gives you some idea or some feeling. At this point, we'd like to open it up for questions and comments. They can be related to the topic, or they can be about Huna or Hawaiian culture, whatever comes to your mind.
Isn't fear a mechanism that is supposed to protect you in dangerous situations?
Is there?
Fear a mechanism that is supposed to protect you when there is a questionable situation?
What do I say? Is there? I'd like to see one. Unfortunately, and fortunately, we don't always know all the factors involved in different situations. What we do know is this, and this can be tested and researched. The more positive your expectations, the more likely you'll get through a difficult situation. No guarantees. But it just turns out that the more positive they are, the more likely, the better your chances of getting into that zone, if we want to call it, where the worst doesn't happen. Sometimes not, but sometimes what we think is the worst turns out to be a benefit. And so, we can surprise ourselves when something terrible does happen and we gain from it in some way. Sometimes that can even be an illness, a sickness, an accident, something that would just on the surface seem terrible. But people have a way of using this inner strength that we're trying to talk about and deciding, all right, this happened. I can't do anything about it. I'm going to do the best I can with it. So we have marathon runners running on artificial legs. We have a whole area of sports where handicapped people engage in the same kinds of sports that normal people engage in. We have people who have become great writers, scientists, in almost every field who have had terrible handicaps. But there's got to be something that we're calling inner strength that makes them go forward in spite of that. That makes athletes who've been told they will never walk again anyway and run anyway. My son, right now, coming back from the hospital for home care for a while before probably some more hospital visits, was told 2 weeks ago by the doctor, direct, face-to-face, if you don't go to this particular hospital, you'll be dead next week. Well, he's far from that. He's got help, he's got support, he's using the things I've taught him as well. But mainly, it's this inner thing that said, no, I'm not going to listen to that. I don't care what that doctor said. I'm going to go forward anyway. This is the idea that we're trying to get across. Your chances are better when you do that. But there's no mechanism, no guarantee, no amulet, no ritual, no secret words that are going to protect you from bad things happening. Anything else? Yes.
What's the difference between power and inner strength?
Power is the ability to do something. That's what it is. Scientifically and metaphysically, it's the ability to do work, or as we often put it, the ability to influence something. That's power. Okay? Inner strength is this difficult thing to clearly define, in which you use that power to do something in spite of fear, in spite of conditions, in spite of circumstances. Now, we would say, yes, it takes a lot of mana to do that, but using the mana is your choice.
Does inner strength, is that related to will then?
It is definitely related to will. Let's talk a little bit about that. Some people say different people have more willpower than other people. No, that's not so. Everybody has willpower. Willpower is the power to make a decision. Everybody has that. The people we say have a strong willpower are the ones that keep making the same decision. When we say a person has weak willpower, they're using the same power, but they're just making a lot of different decisions. That's the only difference. The inner strength comes from applying that willpower consistently. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes.
In the case of the chief that got defeated,
Yes.
why didn't you use those techniques to
Because
that.
he wasn't skilled enough. I mean, you know, we do know that there have been evil kings and evil emperors, and what lasted a long, long time. And in spite of everybody's attempt to pull them down, and finally they just die of old age. That does happen. Okay? In this particular case, it's very simple. He didn't have the skill or talent or the willpower. But some do. Yes?
Can you give me some examples of how Huna can help you tap into your greatest potential?
Well, let's look at those principles in those terms. How can Huna help you develop into your greatest potential? Well, if you use these ideas, if you realize that the world is what you think it is, then you know you have a choice as to how to think about your world. What's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, what's possible, what's not possible. That's all within your power. If you take the idea that says there are no limits, anything is possible if you can figure out how to do it. See, this is a very practical knowledge. See? Sure, anything is possible. If there are no limits, this is an infinite universe. In an infinite universe, everything is possible. That doesn't mean you're going to know how to do it. That you have to learn. That you have to develop. You have to find the resources. But take, for instance, there was a time in history, and this was both Europe and the United States. Well, actually it happened in far ancient times too, but they did it differently. The reason I say that, I was going to talk about flying. Okay? And the Chinese flew with kites. They had man-made kites, man-sized kites that would lift a man. And here in Hawaii, we also have a tradition that the great shaman hero, the Hawaiian Superman, Maui is his name, he also built a kite that he could fly in. Okay? So this has been a very, very old thing that people have done. But when they started building a machine that would fly very much heavier than air, why, we're going to use the Wright brothers as an example, even though there's a little controversy as to who was first. We do know what they did. And they were bicycle mechanics. And like a lot of people, mechanics at the time, they were fascinated with the possibility of flight. 1 week before they flew their plane, a scientific journal came out by a respected scientist proving mathematically that heavier than air flight was impossible. Fortunately, for a lot of people, the Wright brothers did not read that report. And so they got their machine together and off they flew. What I find really interesting is the same scientific theory that was presented also proved conclusively and without a doubt that bumblebees cannot fly. And they do it anyway. Right? So there are no limits if we can figure out how to do it. Now, in your own personal development, that's a very important concept. We say that energy flows where attention goes. And what this brings up is to develop the skill of focusing on what you want and not on what you don't want. It's when we put what we don't want first that we suppress our own potential. So this tells you, put your focus on the results you want, on doing what you want, being and having. We say that now is the moment of power. There's a lot to this one, but I'll make up, one part of it important right now. This is all that exists. For practical purposes, there is no past that's a burden to you. There are memories that exist now that you relate to. They're the only things around. There's no energy from the past. You can't get wet from yesterday's rain. You're not going to get burned by tomorrow's sun. Now is what we've got. And the only thing in our really in our way is what we think of ourselves, what we think of things, and what we think of memories that we have. And you can work with those memories and heal those memories or your relationship to those memories now, no matter what they were or when they happened. That's important to know. We say that to love is to be happy with. It sounds kind of sweet and gentle. But when we get more deeply into it, we realize that love is the whole motivating force of everything. Everything is moving and changing, not towards some great goal particularly, but it's moving to connect. And in the process of connecting, we grow. We grow bigger, we become more, we expand our sense of self. And that's important to develop. We say that all power comes from within. No one has any power over you. And this is the power to choose. Are the people stronger? Sure. Some people are smarter? Right. They have more money, they have more this or that or the other. No one has more power to choose for you than you do. And finally, we say effectiveness is the measure of truth. And what this means is use what works. For instance, the development is the point, or the healing is the point, or whatever it is that you want to create in your life. That's the point. Use what works. And you'll get the best effects when what you use is in harmony with what you want. Whenever possible. That's when you'll get the most efficient effects. But use anything. And so we say, we have sets of techniques that we use in this knowledge, but the knowledge is not the techniques. The techniques are also just tools. So we put it this way: if it works, it's Huna. Okay? Right off the bat. Okay? And so those are ideas that would be very important. Yes?
Okay, we have some people like the overachievers. Do they have more willpowers than the others? Or?
Not necessarily. You see, if we're calling them overachievers, the question is, do overachievers have more power? It depends on why they're trying to overachieve. See, it's one thing to achieve. We give the term overachiever to people who are getting bad side effects from it. In terms of family relationships, in terms of health, in terms of something else. And so these people are usually trying so hard out of fear, not because of something great and good that they want. Maybe they want money, but they want money so they're not poor. So what the motivations make a big difference in all of that. So when we say overachiever, they're not doing something right. Something like the man who works 24/7 for his family. And that doesn't work. Often I've interviewed a lot of these kinds of people, and what they are afraid of is criticism for not working hard enough. And they're so afraid of the criticism that they're losing sight of the effects that their total focus on work is having. And they're becoming disconnected from the family or others. Okay? So that's fear motivation. Fear motivation doesn't work very well. Yes?
What about a situation where somebody else makes the rules, such as a society?
Oh, society has rules.
Overseas?
And here's the answer. What if somebody else makes the rules? Well, governments make rules, people make rules, everybody makes rules. You have a perfect right to follow them or not. Now, sometimes it makes more sense to follow them because of the consequences, but you also have a right to change the rules. I'll give you one short example, and this will finish this part of what we're doing. I joined the United States Marine Corps for a number of reasons that were very good for me at the time. However, I'm also a kind of person that does not like to take orders. And yet the rules said I had to take orders. And the consequences were very bad. for not following our rules. So I had to make up another rule. It first began when I was in the barracks where everybody slept, and I was a private, and a corporal who outranked me came up and handed me a broom and said, "Sweep the barracks." So here's my crisis point. What do? I don't want to follow his orders, but if I don't, I'll go to jail. So an inspiration came to me. I took the broom from him, and in my own mind, I thought, I think I'll sweep the barracks. So then I started to, and enjoyed it very much because it was my idea, not his. And that made all the difference in the world.